However long you think it takes you to build a leader, it'll take much longer than you think. About 5 to 6 months ago, I chose a leader on my 8-year-old team because he had so many traits that I knew for a fact would help him to be a top ideal example for the rest of our team on what it takes to be a leader. 5 to 6 months later, come to find out, I learned that the journey to iron out my leader to be the ideal example of a captain will be much harder than what I thought. Although my captain is vocal and willing to take the lead, when things get tough, he can tend to crumble emotionally. The last few weeks is when it has really stood out to me. In the last training, for the first time, it got to a point where he decided to take himself out of the game while the rest of his team was playing a man down. At this point, I had a decision to make. Will I force him to continue and play with the rest of the team? Or will I keep the decision up to him as far as when he decides to join again, if he decides to join? And this is where the hard part of being a leader comes in for myself. And I knew that I could not force my captain to become a leader, because the ultimate determination of whether your team is full of leaders is what do they do when you're not there. A lot of the times as coaches, we think we are developing leaders by forcing people to do things. And although there may be a place to force people to do specific things, I knew that this specific choice was a decision for the captain, because in games when things get tough, there are many people who fall short emotionally. And I didn't want to force the captain, but what I had to do was to be an example for what I expect of my players. So what I had to do was, instead of forcing him, is I had to encourage him. I had to remind him that without you, us playing a man down, we will struggle and we will not be able to win without you. So I had to encourage him. I had to remind him of his value. So this is very difficult for a lot of coaches, because a lot of coaches, and I almost had this temptation, is to force him to get back in. But what you must always remember is that we are here to develop leaders, not to enforce followers.
This is Sparta!
So let your players, let your captain make the decision. When you do this, that is growth within your captain. And you must always remember, what your players do in front of you is not any indication of true leadership. It's what they do when you are not there. That's how you will determine if your players, if your team is full of leaders or not. A lot of the times we get in the way of developing leaders because we want to rush the process. We want to force the process, but you cannot force a leader. And I cannot emphasize this enough. You must be an example of leadership. You must display what you want from your team. So how you conduct yourself is how other players will look at you when that same moment comes. So keep in mind that my captain came up with the value to never give up, but he was not displaying the characteristic of never giving up. So I did not remind him, I did not tell him, you made this rule.
Jesus.
You said it, man.
You have to live up to this rule. I didn't say that because I knew that when things were tough in a real game, when I wasn't present, I knew that his teammates telling him that would not work. And I knew that our third value of communicating instructions always, which includes encouraging, is the value that I wanted our players to display in these moments. So I had to be the one to put myself down as a coach on the players' level, because I had to be the example that I wanted them to follow. So all in all, the point I am trying to make is, in whatever expectations, in whatever values, in whatever traits that you want to instill in your team, you must be the one to display them. Because no matter what you say, if you do not display them, your team will know subconsciously that it is not what you stand for. It's a lot of talk, but no action. Ultimately, what you do is what gets done, not what you say. So be that example for your team.